Yep.
David? Okay.
Yes.
Okay, I'd like to call to order the Scio Township Board of Trustees meeting of Friday, October 30th, 2020 at about 3:38 p.m. If you would, David, if you would please call the roll, and if everyone would also give their location and county, please.
Knowles?
Yeah. Jack Knowles. I'm in Scio Township, Washtenaw County.
Palmer?
Yes, I'm in Scio Township, Washtenaw County.
Flintoff? She's absent for the moment. Knoll? Kathy?
Yes, Scio Township, Washtenaw County.
Martin?
Yes, Scio, Washtenaw.
Green?
Yes, Christine Green, Scio Township, Washtenaw County.
Reed? Yes, here, Scio Township, Washtenaw County.
Great, thank you. Item C is adoption of the agenda. Does anyone have any additions, revisions to the agenda? Hearing none, would someone please move the agenda?
So move.
I'll support.
Motion Martin, support Green. Discussion? Hearing none, please call the roll.
Knowles? Knowles?
Yes.
Palmer?
Yes,
Martin?
Yes.
Knoll?
Yes.
Green?
Yes.
Reed? Yes.
Did you
It
hear
passes.
me? Yes.
Yes, I heard you. And
Thank you.
the 6.
Item D is approval of the minutes. There are none. Item E is citizen comment. This is the time allotted to receive comments from the public. Any member of the public may address the board at this time. However, it's not intended to be an opportunity for dialogue or questions and answers. Each person has one opportunity to address us at this time with a 5-minute individual time limit. If you are using your computer, if you would use the raised hand feature to indicate that you're wishing to speak. And if you've joined us via telephone, if you use the *9 feature, that is the phone raise hand feature. Dave, do you see anybody that wishes to address us?
Yes, we have a few. First one, we'll have Harvey Summers first, and then followed by Michelle Cody next.
Good afternoon. My name
Go ahead, Harvey.
My name is Harvey Summers. I live at 2129 Autumn Hill Drive. Roger Rayle tells us in his message earlier today that, quote, Danaher-Gelman has been withholding evidence about its dioxane in our waters of the state for some 3 years. Roger's talking about data from company-installed sampling wells not being shared since 2017, and he tells us, quote, that data is key to defining the dioxane problem here. And then he asks, quote, how can elected officials evaluate whether to approve the settlement proposal without access to all the data? That's a great question, even before Roger raises several others. My understanding is that all of the trustees were sent this message. In my public comments more than a year ago, when the trustees were considering a proposal from Danaher which would permit the company to continue to remediate the Gelman dioxane plume instead of moving to the cleanup to the EPA Superfund, I said, I cannot see why any of us should trust Danaher, which had bought Paul in 2015, which in turn had bought Gelman in 1997. Danaher and his predecessors have failed to make serious progress on remediation since the dioxane was discovered to be a problem 35 years ago. Based on this track record, I would urge Scio trustees to oppose a deal with Danaher. That continues to be my view. A month later, in October 2019, I reminded you at the regular meeting of the Scio Township Board of Trustees held on June 14th, 2016, the trustees passed a resolution supporting, quote, a petition to the U.S. EPA for the Gelman-Paul Danaher site to be designated as a U.S. EPA Superfund site under the Comprehensive Environmental Response Compensation and Liability Act, and that the U.S. EPA be the lead agency. I still think that is the correct avenue. But today, I say that the proposed consent judgment is a flawed compromise that will not resolve the dangers for our community posed by the Gelman plume. You should reject it. At the beginning of the 4-year term of this Board of Trustees, you made a courageous decision to move this site to designation as the US EPA Superfund site. At the very end of your term, I hope you will not choose to support this much weaker consent judgment proposal. The public is watching. Our grandchildren and great-grandchildren will learn in their studies who did their due diligence in 2020. Thank you.
Okay, next we have Michelle Cody, and then we'll have Roger Rayle. Go ahead, Michelle.
Okay, thank you. This is Michelle Cody, 4620 Stein Road. I am a resident of Scio Township for 32 years, and this Gelman controversy has been going on for 28 years and counting. And how has it changed? Not at all. It's still just monitoring the spread damage, but it's not mitigating the source, and that's morally indefensible. What good are monitoring wells when all it does is tell the homeowners and real estate agents that the imminent dangers they're in while reducing land values and poisoning people? Even with city water, it's now apparent the Ann Arbor water supply via the Huron River is in the pathway of the Gelman plume. And plus, living with a crisis and watching it unfold is not changing the impact. It's just like an alarm clock ticking down for a wake-up call with alarming results. Oh, the plume has reached the Huron River and X number of homes. Homes with families. My daughter and her family live on West Delhi by 94. They've had their well tested. It's only a matter of time until the plume migrates. And she's a pregnant mom also. And my daughter and our grandchildren would be affected. This is a 28-year disgrace and pandering to a corporation that has successfully battled against its clear culpability as the cause of the plume. 28 years. And what about the source? Why not an EPA Superfund site? Are we another Flint, Michigan on the horizon here? I would like to stop the corporate pussyfooting around and stand up for the people. I would appreciate it if y'all would. It's been 28 years, not the Gelman greed over people, or Dana here. It's criminal. And I would appreciate it being declared an EPA Superfund site and get on with it. This bargaining needs to end. So thank you for your time and your attention.
Thank you. Okay, Roger, you're next. And after Roger will be Rita Mitchell. Okay, Roger, you have the floor.
So I'm a little concerned that some people might not find this because of the meeting number snafu. And that might violate something, but I'll just reiterate that this is a flawed consent judgment proposal. It was the process that resulted in it is flawed because it basically ignored a lot of what we've learned at CARD over the years. CARD and its predecessors. There's institutional knowledge that CARD has that was clearly not incorporated. We don't know if it's been in negotiations or not. We do know there's information that we have that's not in the official database. As I pointed out in one of my recent emails, I've proved that there's installed monitoring wells on the Gelman site over the burn pit area that's supposed to be sealed that have not been, that data for those wells, the well log data and any sampling data that might have been there, have not been released. When this was first discovered and mentioned at a CARDS meeting, the people who were involved said, well, we can't talk about that that's part of the secret negotiations. But then the assistant AG chimed in and said, well, if anybody's going to get in trouble, it was him. And that was regarding the truck mats in the marshy area. And that led to other discoveries of a slew of monitoring well permits that were applications that Gelman submitted. And those early information from that didn't show where the wells were, but then subsequently, really ironically, because of the triangle property, that controversy, we found out there's another way to get to some of that information, and that information had some aerial photographs. And then when we looked at the base layer on Google Earth, there's these wells that are showing up. You can even see it from the Google Earth's aerial images. So I went out there a couple of days ago and took pictures of them on their asphalt right over the former burn pit area. The other thing I noticed on the former burn pit area is that the asphalt is cracked away. That's supposed to be a sealed area to prevent water from seeping down into the burn pit area and moving the dioxide in places that they didn't want it to move. And they haven't maintained that, obviously. Also, you notice on those photographs I sent you that there's other little squares next to the permanent monitoring well that appear to be patches of asphalt. So they've probably done some temporary sampling there in recent years and had to repatch the asphalt. And as far as I can tell, we don't have the monitoring for any of those temporary samples, and that might have been before the secret negotiations started. So there's a lot going on at the core that we don't know. And it could mean that there's something going on there that the company doesn't want the public to know about. And that's why when they say they're going to clean up these hot spots, the hot spot at the core, they're not attacking the middle of that hot spot. You know, they're a football field away with their proposed purge wells. What is it about the actual core area that they don't want, what's going on there that they don't want people to know about? And I'm pretty sure your attorneys don't know about this either, because you're not going to pay them whatever hundreds of dollars an hour to do this kind of research. But this is something that we citizens have done over the years to fill the void, because, you know, Scio Township is a general law township. We don't have staff to do this. So SSW and volunteers like me have been the staff for the township. And yet we were not involved in this negotiation, which we could have made a lot quicker and faster and cheaper. So the whole process about how this was developed, it's no wonder that he ended up with a flawed consent judgment proposal, because the process itself is flawed. So that's about all I have to say today, and please reject this. Let's get on with a proper cleanup, either with the EPA or getting the judge to weigh in and do some of the good things that are necessary. Thank you.
Thank you, Roger. Okay, next is Rita Mitchell, and then we'll have Pam Boyd.
Hello, this is Rita Mitchell.
Rita.
Hi. I'm a resident of Ann Arbor, and I'm calling you as a member of our community in general. We share borders, but really we all still live in the same region. And I'm asking you to vote collectively to reject the consent judgment that you're presented with, because I believe, from what I understand of it, that it is with an agreement with an untrustworthy actor. And the Gelman, Paul Danaher company that has not provided adequate information, as Roger Rayle just explained to you, that has not communicated well with the community, and that I don't believe has our best interests in mind. And we, as members of the community in general, trust you and our other elected officials. We have to trust you because you're making decisions for us. And it's that core trust that I feel is not warranted of this company. And I believe that we will get a better resolution of the situation that affects our common water source. That is something that we need now and for generations in the future. That I feel we can place our trust better in the EPA to resolve it in a way that will clean it up for the future. We need that, and we've been waiting too long for it. Please vote no on this and maintain our trust in you as elected officials. Thank you.
Thank you, Rita. Next, Pam Boyd is next, followed by Patricia Kraus. Go ahead, Pam. You have the floor.
Good afternoon. Pam Boyd, 517 Linden Lane. In 1985 and 1986, I spent a lot of time walking my dog in Saginaw Forest, the U of S property, directly to the west of the Gelman property. One of the things that struck me as being very odd was the lack of animals on that property. There were no squirrels to be found. Trust me, I had a big dog who liked to chase things. And very few birds. That was, 35 years ago? This has been going on too long. I encourage the board to move this to the federal level. Stop trying to fix it ourselves at the local level. We need to move on. It's time. I request that you vote no on this. Thank you.
Okay, thank you, Patricia. I'm sorry. Next is Patricia, and followed by James Demore.
Thank you. I'm Patricia Kraus, and my husband Louis and I live at 687 Lakeview Avenue. And we have lived here for 3 decades. So we've been having our water tested because we're right on the sister lake, second sister lake. We've been having our water tested routinely all these decades. And so far, even though we're close to Gelman, we've been so fortunate to not have our water contaminated. And both of the sister lakes, from my understanding, are uncontaminated at the time. So it boggles my mind that any consent agreement would say that after all these decades of, and I'm going to say suffering, because it's quite a worry to have your water tested and not knowing if your total investment in your property is going to be lost because you are polluted. Nobody is going to want to move into a polluted, contaminated area. And so we've suffered through this all these decades and we're still uncontaminated. So why on earth would we ever allow the polluter, who we all know has been tenuous at the best in terms of their trustworthiness, why would we allow them to now pump unprecedented amounts of water and a certain level of ppb of dioxane into these uncontaminated lakes? And I think that I cannot thank the citizens of this area enough. Roger Rayle, I've never met him, but I've listened to him speak. They have done an awesome job of learning about this, and in an area where I think Scio Township and Ann Arbor has not been able to invest to be able to learn as much about it. And so we're very grateful to him, and I certainly hope that you would review his materials, listen to his advice, and listen to your constituents who are asking you now to reject this consent agreement. I don't envy you for being in this position, because I'm sure that Scio Township would love to have this put behind them. But it's, I know that all of the residents are going to be watching this very, very closely. And today, this day, it's up to you to make sure that we are safe. And I guess I would finally end by just asking you to think if this is not in your backyard right now, what would you do if this was really in your backyard? I am 10 houses away from the lake. My water supply, my water table is under that lake. So, and I'm just talking about dioxane, not even the flooding possibilities for the enormous amount of water they're going to pump. So it's so very concerning. And I would ask that, along with the others, we're really begging you to please reject this consent judgment on our behalf. Thank you so much.
Okay, thank you. Let's see who's next. That would be James Damore, and then next after James is Alexander. I don't have Alexander's last name, but he'll tell us soon. Go ahead, James.
David, can you hear me?
Yes, go ahead.
Thank you. Thank you, Supervisor Knowles and Township trustees. My name is James Damore, and I am a member of CARD. Just a quick background about myself and why I'm speaking today. I was vice chair of the Sierra Club Heron Valley Group when our body, along with Scio and our townships, petitioned U.S. EPA to declare the Gelman, to do a preliminary investigation to declare the Gelman plume as a Superfund site. I wanted, there's not much more that I could really share except that through my being an officer with the Sierra Club at that time, I took upon myself to participate in the CARD meetings, and I've become a full member of CARD itself. And I appreciate the hard work that Mr. Rayle and many others have done in terms of the work, in terms of trying to address the terrible problems involved with this plume. I guess I want to share the concerns that others, and particularly Mr. Rayle, have shared regarding the plume. And it's clear we have a lot of work ahead of us. I really appreciate the township taking a leadership role in this matter, which is more than other government bodies should have been doing. I'm glad that they reached out to the US EPA. And in that vein, regarding what's before you today, I think the major issue that led me to speak today is the consent judgment, and in particular, provision in there that that the township would waive its rights to petition US EPA to go ahead with a consent judgment. As discussed by other speakers, I think this consent judgment is fundamentally flawed, provides some terrible options, and why on earth would the township give away its rights when more direct action by the federal government at this time is warranted, more direct action by the federal government, and its oversight is warranted to make things right. I say reject this consent judgment because you do not want to give your rights. You certainly do want to have the EPA on deck, if not involved directly in this matter. Having the US EPA involved will ensure best management practices in terms of cleanup, including ultraviolet remediation, in terms of other review, in terms of the issues that Mr. Rayle talked about earlier. I don't have too much more to say. I want to thank everyone's hard work. I know all of you have worked very hard on this issue, and I salute you, and good luck, and hopefully you make the right decisions today. At any rate, please reject this consent judgment. Thank you.
Thank you. Next is Alexander. Alexander, you have the floor. After Alexander will be Noah Moore.
Hi, can everybody hear me?
Yes.
My name is Alexander Weinstein, and I'm a resident of Scio Township and a homeowner at 523 Lakeview Avenue. I've been asked to speak on behalf of the residents of our street who all similarly wish to ask that you reject the CJ and vote against it. I live on the second sister lake, 2 houses away from the lake, and I have a well that would be directly affected by this settlement. As well, I have 4 children who would be directly affected by this document. As you know, the polluter has proposed that they'd be pumping and treating dioxane and discharging the contaminated water with dioxane bromate directly into the sister lake through the Park Lake well as one of its methods for disposing of this cleanup. And this is a horrible and completely unacceptable solution, one that endangers me directly, my children, my community, and our wetlands. When I became a homeowner, I was thankful to know that my well in the lake has reported 0 dioxane every year. And I expect, and I continue to expect, that Scio Township will do everything that you can to protect these lakes, the wetlands, the community that lives by the lake, as well as our greater community. The Park Lake well, by design, will be destroying a lake that has zero dioxane in it presently. And so I ask that you hold true to your promises and dedication to our environment and the citizens of Scio Township. I'm also very thankful for the previous interest in pursuing an EPA cleanup, and I support that. I was very thankful for the rejection of the CJ by the City Council of Ann Arbor, especially after they'd temporarily entertained the idea of adding amendments in order to get a yay vote. For example, it had been suggested that a much more ecologically sound option would be the installation of a pipeline which would carry the processed water to the Gelman central treatment plant on Wagner, where it would then lead to the overflow in Honey Creek. This center is only a quarter mile away, which made the solution all the more viable. But while this would prevent the overall overflow to sister lakes, since the option is not in the present settlement, the direct dangers that this settlement would have on the community, the wetlands, citizens of Ann Arbor and Scio Township have been either addressed, solved, or thoroughly researched. Most importantly, through recent meetings and shared documents, it's become clear that a thorough investigation of the effects of this CJ on the sister lakes in the neighborhood hasn't been conducted. And I would ask that you investigate how such research could be attained in order to assess the dangers that this CJ poses. Given that the research doesn't presently exist, I ask that you reject the solution, as it only allows the polluter to further endanger Scio Township residents and the sister lake areas. I'll also say that regardless of whether the proposed overflow discharges into sister lakes or into Honey Creek, this is a serious threat both of overflow as well as the issue of carcinogens in our larger water supply. Moreover, as been detailed in the documents, letters, videos by Dan Bicknell, Roger Rayle, Matthew Nod, Lawrence Dolph, Arnold and Jean Klug, and others, this solution would create a number of negative environmental impacts to the surrounding area, including the very likely flooding and destruction of wildlife and neighborhoods. In his testimony today, Dan Bicknell continues to give deeply disturbing evidence and information about Gelman's unethical behavior, and I'm so very thankful to him and to Roger Rayle for their work and dedication to protecting the citizens of Scio Township. I ask that we listen to them, that we include them, that we use their expertise as we work together to hold this polluter responsible. This is simply one of the many problems of this flawed CJ. It's a deeply unethical document. The settlement is unacceptable to me. The fourth CJ would directly allow the polluter to get out of damage and future damage they've done. I was dismayed to see that Ann Arbor was attempting to pass small amendments to gain a yay approval, and I hope that today's meeting will not push for the same wish to add small amendments to gain a yay. I've looked over the proposed amendment that's listed today on the agenda, and while it does remove Section C about future wetland permits, there are many, many more problems to the CJ, which Dan Bicknell has outlined much more expert than I can. The small amendments suggested by the document shared today do not address the incredibly deep problems of the CJ. Just one of the many issues that disturbs me is Section 4, release of claims, which, as I understand it, states that Scio Township would forever waive an ability to sue Gelman for the very real damages that their pollution has or may cause. This document's cleverly worded legal document which puts the interests of the polluter and corporations above the direct damage caused to individuals. And I come to you as someone whose life and whose children's lives will be directly impacted in an awful way if you do not reject this proposal. It hurts and endangers our citizens. It hurts and endangers my very children, and they happen to be among the individuals that this CJ is willing to
30
sacrifice. Please don't accept this document. It trades off our rights and our health. I urge any of you who are considering approving this to rethink your vote for the sake of our community and our power in holding the polluter responsible. And ask that you vote as though your own children would be the ones to be affected by the pollution, which, alas, I think we all will if you don't oppose this CJ and hold the polluters responsible. I thank you in advance for rejecting this document, and on behalf of all of us who count on you to do the right thing. Thank you.
Well time, sir. Okay, next is, let me stop this first. Next is Noah Moore. Noah, you have the floor.
Hello, my name is Noah Moore, and I live at 116 Luella Avenue. From the best I can tell, the maps I've looked at, I live probably about an eighth of a mile from the plume. But from what I've also heard, it doesn't seem like they're able to tell exactly where the plume is, based on just like how deep it is and if the wells are actually connecting with it. Any rate, my wife and I just bought this home. We're new residents here, and we have a 7-month-old daughter. And we're really concerned about this. Our well is tested every other year, I think. And so far, we don't have any dioxin in our well, but at a testing rate of every other year, if this dioxin entered our well the day after they tested, I could be drinking dioxin water for up to 2 years before they test it again and tell me that I actually have dioxin in my water. So this has moved us to the point where we are only drinking bottled water and using distilled water for everything that we do in our house, which just doesn't seem right to me, that we should be that concerned that we can't even use our water in our home. So I would urge you all to reject this proposal to show us that you actually care about our health and safety, and move towards something that we can actually trust drinking our water. Yeah, that's all. Thank you.
Thank you. Jillian, I apologize for not letting you know you're on deck, but you're next. So you have the floor. And after Jillian will be Froda.
Oh, there we go. Okay, can you hear me?
Yes, go ahead.
Okay, great. Thank you. So I'm going to read this to you. Danaher is firmly committed to building our business with integrity. We are known and respected for dealing honestly and fairly. We believe with conviction that acting with integrity at all times is the foundation for success, both individually and together. Our internal integrity and compliance motto, your integrity, our success, says it all. Our strong culture of integrity and compliance supports our core values and helps us achieve our purpose for helping realize life's potential. I trust that you have read the consent judgment. And does the consent judgment, can you honestly say that consent judgment lives up to their statement? And with Roger's recent findings, does that match their integrity and compliance statement? Is Danaher really living up to this? It doesn't seem so. By voting no to the CJ, you are voting yes for better options. You are voting yes for the health of our environment. You are voting yes for the hope for our community. You are voting yes for the care of our future generations. Please leave a positive legacy and vote no against this consent judgment. Thank you.
Thank you. Frode, you have the floor, and Will Hathaway is next. Frode?
You have to unmute.
Okay, did I do something wrong? Frode, are you there?
Yeah, can you hear me?
Yes, we can.
Okay, there it is, yeah.
Sorry about that. Go ahead.
We were clicking each other there.
I think so. Go ahead.
Yeah, this is Frode Massidvag, and we have been living here in Scio Township happily for over 40 years. And the Gelman plume has loomed over us for too many of these years that we've been here. And several people, or the people that have spoken so far, have spoken eloquently and with data backing up their comments extremely well. And so I'm not going to repeat any of that. But I believe with my whole heart that I hope that I'm right, and that you will think of the constituents that you serve, that voted you in, that you will pay attention to what people have said, and then look at the data, and you have the plume data in front of you, and you've seen that move over the years that you've been at the township, both as citizens and as voted leaders of our township, and I urge you to please vote no on this consent agreement. We have to get this cleaned up for the future, for the current people and the future, for the good future that is ahead of us in Scio Township. So please do not disappoint us by voting yes on this consent agreement. So please say no, no, no. It must be cleaned up properly. Thank you for your attention.
Thank you, Frode. Will Hathaway is next, and after Will be Mike Moran. Go ahead, Will, you have the floor. I think.
Am I unmuted?
Yes, you are.
Right. Hi, I'm Will Hathaway. I live at 3424 Stowe Street in a neighborhood where we now have regular testing of our wells because the plume is moving to the north. I serve on the board of Scio Residents for Safe Water. This is one of the early groups to monitor the dioxin pollution cleanup. You have the SRSW letter detailing our objections to the new consent judgment. We view this as a flawed plan. I won't reiterate all of our concerns. I do want to acknowledge the hard work and time that went into this negotiation. I don't want to diminish that. 3 years is a long time, but it is a very short time when we think of how long-term a threat we are facing. This pollution will outlast all of us. This is what Roger Rayle has called a 300-year problem. Sometimes we have a negotiation that results in a bad agreement. And the important thing is to recognize that this is one of those times. Recognize that this consent judgment should be turned down. We can do better. I urge all members of the Board of Trustees to vote no. Thank you.
Thank you, Will. Okay, next up is Mike Moran. Michael, go ahead.
Can you hear me now?
Yes.
Okay, thank you. My name is Michael Moran. I'm, for the last 18 years, I've been supervisor of Ann Arbor Township. Currently, I'm a trustee of the township. I wanted to just acquaint you, first of all, with the fact that, if you're not already aware, that Ann Arbor Township adopted a resolution to oppose and recommend rejecting this proposed consent decree on September 14th of this year. We did so because the board concluded that it would allow 1,4-dioxane plume to mitigate freely toward Ann Arbor Township wells, that there were an insufficient number of sentinel wells to detect the movement of the plume, especially the northward movement toward Barton Pond, that there were an insufficient number of extraction wells to stop the movement of the plume, that the terms of the proposal would permit an easy future expansion of the prohibition zone, forced institutional controls to be imposed on property owners' property, and failed to pay the true cost of the connection to a municipal water system where those systems are available. And in many areas of Ann Arbor Township, like Scio Township, there's not a municipal water system available. In addition, the board felt that this proposal provided an easy early exit strategy for Gelman. Basically, if you've read the documents, I'm sure you have, you would note that it permits the beginning of an exit when the pollution levels at the core get down to 500 parts per billion, which is 69.4 times the drinking water standard. Even though that continuing water will continue to flow across our communities for decades to come. For these reasons, the board felt that in balance, the proposed consent judgment did not offer enough reasons to support recommending that the interveners agree to it. A couple of thoughts, including one that I agree that Will just made, and that is that despite the fact that we felt that after 3 years of interveners negotiations, this was a wholly inadequate agreement, we don't mean that as a knock on your lawyers. I did not expect anything to come out of these negotiations because for 30 years, Gelman has been aggressively seeking to minimize the effects of its pollution. I did not expect them to take any different approach here, and certainly they did not. A number of other considerations, as you know, Ann Arbor Township did petition or authorize petitioning the EPA for intervention here. And many folks view this as a binary choice between EPA or this proposed fourth amended consent judgment. I think that understates the problem. It's not really a binary choice between those two. It's really a question of what gains over the third consent judgment, the current consent judgment, are brought about by this proposal, and what concessions do you have to make to get these? Now, in terms of gains, what do I see? I see that it lowers the drinking water standard to 7.2 from 85. But really, it seems very likely to me that if the litigation continued, that lowering would also be accomplished. I mean, after all, the state has already determined, first as an emergency rule and then as a permanent rule, that the 7.2 standard is necessary to protect public health. So I don't think that's that much of a gain. There are a few new wells that are sentinel wells and extraction wells added by this agreement, but not an adequate number. Larry Lemke made it clear, and I'm quoting from him, that the number and location of wells are not even close to being adequate to detect the plume migration. He also indicated that there was, all right, thank you. So when you look at those, you look at the cons. You would have to give up your intervener status, something that you have fought hard to gain, and you have succeeded throughout the courts. You would have to give up the option of petitioning the EPA. You would have to sign a very broad waiver of claims that includes all future releases of pollution of whatever type, other than some minor PFAS issues that are in there. And you even have to assert that you agree that you did not rely upon anything they've told you up to this point in time. It provides the early exit strategy, as I said. The plume continues to migrate toward wells in Ann Arbor and Scio Township. I think that this proposal makes clear a number of things. One, Gelman wants you to give up your status as interveners and not intervene in the future.
Michael, you're really past your 5 minutes.
Thank you. Thank you. And Gelman wants you out as soon as possible, and they do not want you to join with us in petitioning the EPA. This is an important decision. Thank you for listening to my comments.
Thank you, Michael. Next up is Jackie Courteau. Jackie, you have the floor.
Thank you. Thank you to the Board of Trustees for the time you've spent on this issue, and especially to Trustees Green and Knoll, because I know you've worked really hard on this matter. A lot of my comments echo what was just said. I really appreciate the effort that went into negotiating the fourth consent judgment. But my question to all of you is, what do we gain and what do we lose in this consent judgment beyond the imposition of the new lower standard for 1,4-dioxane for drinking water and discharges to surface water? While the comparison document of the third and fourth CJs highlights that there is a lot of additional monitoring and treatment wells, the calculations presented by Roger Rayle at a previous meeting suggest that the total amount of of remediation will not necessarily be much greater than it is, especially because of the new allowance for groundwater, surface water mixing as a dilution factor. And in fact, it's even possible that there will be less cleanup than currently. When we think about the consent judgment, though, what we lose, importantly, is essential flexibility for the future. By limiting the ability of the interveners to take action in the future, I think the fourth CJ actually takes us a step backward. And the language in that limitation is pretty strong, and I'll just read it, a brief excerpt. The township hereby irrevocably and unconditionally forever waives, releases, relinquishes, acquits, covenants not to sue, and discharges Gelman, its predecessors, and its parent corporation, et cetera, from any and all claims that it may now or in the future have against the released parties. So I'm really concerned about giving up those future rights. I think if this CJ is rejected, there will be more flexibility for other continuing actions. Perhaps the judge can set additional requirements. Perhaps
Oops.
I would urge you to please vote no on this consent judgment to ensure that we will be in the strongest possible position to hold Gelman-Danaher accountable to continue the cleanup. Thank you.
Thank you, Jackie. I don't see any other hands. Hold on a second. You see? Oh, I'm sorry. There's one more hand. You'll have to identify yourself, though. I just have you identified as area code 734 and the last four digits 464. So if you would please identify yourself, you have the floor.
*9 to unmute.
I think you have the floor.
Am I unmuted now?
I believe you are, yes.
Okay, thank you. My name is Linda Brower. I'm an Ann Arbor resident at 421 3rd Street. And I appreciate the opportunity to talk at your meeting. As you know, Ann Arbor City Council recently voted to reject the consent judgment and its settlement agreement. And they are planning to discuss a resolution to petition for EPA Superfund status next week. I don't know if that's going to survive a potential mayoral veto or not, but they are going to discuss it. I'm speaking because Scio, Ann Arbor City, Ann Arbor Township, we're all part of the same community affected by this toxic pollution caused by Gelman. I urge you to reject this consent judgment and settlement agreement. As so many Scio residents and others have stated, enough is enough. It's been decades of fruitless negotiation efforts and more than 3 years of secret negotiations. On this most recent fourth amended consent judgment, I urge you to listen. I think everything depends on who you listen to, and I urge you to listen to your own township experts. You've got, in Roger Rayle and Dan Bicknell, you've got incredible local expertise. And what's important to keep in mind is they have no vested interest. They're not making any money on their countless hours over decades of research and investigation and monitoring. They're only in it for the benefit of the community, for the benefit of clean water. The others who are trying to whisper in your ears, they have vested interest. Gelman certainly doesn't have the residents' best interest in mind. Their only concern is their bottom line. They have shown themselves to be untrustworthy, and they're not negotiating in good faith. The attorneys, I believe your attorneys did the best they could do, but it's time to recognize that the best they can do isn't good enough if all they came up with is this fourth amended agreement. And I don't think they should even be advising you to accept it. I think they should be saying, look, this is the best we could do, and frankly, maybe it's not good enough. So I urge you to to reject it. In closing, I want to say that it's flawed in so many ways. As so many others have pointed out, there's so many deal breakers. But the major one is giving up any recourse to the EPA in the future. As I think it was Jackie Cousteau that just said, this is actually a step backward from the third CJ, the third amended version of the CJ. Not only does it remove your intervener status, it precludes you from seeking redress through the EPA Superfund status in the future without paying, I don't know, $1 million fine or something. It's basically a consent judgment that is kneecapping you and the other interveners, and I encourage you to stand up to that and just reject it. Gelman has had 30 years to show good faith, and they've failed time and time again. And then I know that there's concerns about the stigma and the time it will take for EPA to do anything. But you know what? I think some of that has been exaggerated to instill fear in us, to kind of bow down to Gelman, and we shouldn't let that fear overcome this decision. If we had started the EPA process 3.5 years ago, think of where we'd be. Now, if we don't do it now, you know, in 10 years, we're not going to be any better off. Whereas I think the first step I'm hoping is that you will reject this consent judgment. And then next after that, I hope you'll consider asking Governor Whitmer to support a petition to the EPA to put this site on the national priorities list. Again, Gelman has had decades to try to do something right, and they haven't, and I don't think they ever will. So it's really up to you to do what you can for the community. Thank you so much for listening.
Thank you, Linda. We do have one more hand raised, and that is phone number starting with 313 and ending with 556. So if you please identify yourself, you have the floor.
Hi, my name's Ralph McKee. I'm an Ann Arbor resident, and I appreciate you having me speak at your meeting. I would like to start with echoing the process concerns raised by Mr. Rayle. The activists should be involved at a minimum at the beginning of the negotiations in order to determine what to ask for and what your bottom line should be. Unfortunately, that didn't happen. I would also like to echo the points made by Mr. Moran. I thought he gave a very coherent and cogent outline of the issues and the reasons to reject this. We've waited essentially 4 years for this result, and unfortunately, it looks like Danaher wouldn't give the agreement that everyone had hoped for, so the wait really wasn't worth it. There's some positives, but there are many negatives, at least 7 major ones that I see: giving up the right to request the EPA, allowing Danaher to walk away after a few years if they get the PPBs down to 500, the discharge of water into the lake with that potential damage to the wetlands, the elimination of the Maple Road containment objective, the mixing zone-based groundwater interface criteria, and the potential expansion of the prohibition zone. I appreciate that there aren't any really good options here. The CJ, the state court case, negotiations, and the EPA, that makes your decision difficult. And I appreciate your time and energy in considering those options. One item that hasn't been discussed yet by other speakers is that the EPA has an additional advantage, which is not spending our local and state tax dollars, which obviously have been pretty high on all of this. And once the EPA comes in and determines Danaher to be a responsible party, then they pay, which I think is a very important point. One other point that I think needs to be made is that the Park Lake well would take at least a year to get a permit. And without that well running, the amount of dioxane being removed is not significantly different than what's happening right now. And that permit, if it's not granted, the removal rate will not change in the future either. So I think those are considerations that are major. I don't think that the deal being offered by Danaher is anywhere near good enough to waive other significant rights that you have. Thank you.
Thank you. I don't see any more hands raised. Last call, I guess, for public comment. All right. Oh, I'm sorry. Here's one. Carol Furtado, you have the floor.
I just want to add my voice to all the other voices you've heard. I'm at 505 Lakeview Avenue in Scio Township, just a very short distance from the edge of the plume. And if it got expanded, our whole neighborhood would be having toxic water. The lake would be toxic. The wetland would be destroyed. So please reject this proposal. Thank you.
Thank you, Carol. I see no more hands, Mr. Supervisor.
Thank you, David. Okay, moving along in the agenda. Item F, presentations and reports, there are none. Item G, public hearings, there are none. H, consent agenda, there is none. So we go to item I, which is action items. And the first item is action on the settlement documents in Attorney General versus Gelman Sciences, Inc., Washtenaw County Circuit case number 88-34734-CE. I'm going to introduce a resolution to the board for discussion. This is resolution to approve settlement documents in Attorney General versus Gelman Sciences, Inc., Washtenaw County Circuit court case number 88-34734-CE. This is dated October 30th, 2020, and it reads as follows. At a special meeting of the Township Board of Scio Township, Washtenaw County, Michigan, held at the Township Administration Building located at 827 North Zeeb Road in said township on the 30th of October 2020 at 3:30 p.m. The following preamble and resolutions were offered. Whereas, in 2017, Scio Township, along with Washtenaw County and its Health Department, the City of Ann Arbor, and the Huron River Watershed Council intervened in the case entitled Attorney General versus Gelman Sciences, Inc., which is pending in Washtenaw County Circuit Court, case number 88-34734-CE, originally brought in 1988 to require Gelman Sciences, Inc. to conduct remedial actions related to the 1,4-dioxane released from its property on Wagner Road in Scio Township, in parentheses, litigation, in parentheses. Whereas, at the time of the intervention, Gelman was subject to a third amended consent judgment, which was in need of further amendment due to the reductions of the state drinking water cleanup standard for 1,4-dioxane in 2016 from 85 parts per liter to UG-L to 7.2 UG-L, and the groundwater surface water interface standard from 2,800 UG/L to 280 UG/L. Whereas Scio Township and other interveners have participated in negotiations with the Michigan Department of Environment, Great Lakes and Energy, otherwise known as EGLE, and Gelman for a fourth amended and restated consent judgment and related settlement documents. Whereas the negotiations concluded with a proposed fourth amended and restated consent judgment, including attachments A through L, a proposed stipulated order, and proposed settlement agreement between Gelman and Scio Township, parentheses, settle documents, end parentheses. Whereas the settlement documents were made public on September 30th, 2020. Whereas Eagle and Gelman have approved the settlement documents. Whereas the settlement documents have been presented to the governing bodies of each of the interveners for consideration and decision. Whereas Scio Township has received public comment regarding the settlement documents. Whereas the settlement documents are now before the Scio Township Board of Trustees for public deliberation and decision. Now therefore be it resolved that the Scio Township Board of Trustees authorizes and directs its outside counsel, William Stapleton, to advise the court of Scio Township's approval of the settlement documents and take all other steps necessary for entry by the court of the fourth amended and restated consent judgment and the stipulated order. Be it further resolved that Scio Township authorizes and directs the township supervisor, the township clerk, and the township's outside counsel, William Stapleton, to execute the settlement agreement between Gelman and Scio Township. Be it further resolved that Scio Township authorizes and directs its outside counsel, William Stapleton, to take all other steps necessary to resolve the pending litigation. Does anyone wish to move that resolution?
I'll move the resolution.
Okay, I have a motion by Trustee Martin. Is there
I'll
support for
second.
that?
I'm sorry, I was muted. I'll second the motion.
Okay, support by Green. Discussion.
If I may,
Who would like to begin this
if I
discussion?
may, for the record, the UG/L is micrograms per liter.
Thank you.
Okay.
Who would like to start this discussion? Go ahead, Trustee Martin.
I'd like to offer, introduce and then offer the amendment that is listed. This is amendment to the settlement document, not an amendment to the consent judgment. It's to the settlement document. Based on public comment, based on the testimony of experts, there is clearly concern about the discharge of the treated water into the sister lake. The current, and we agree with that, frankly, or at least I do. I won't speak for everyone. I'm introducing this on my own behalf. The current settlement document has a paragraph in section 5.c that basically states, and it's in the book, so I'm not going to read the entire thing, but it basically states that we're supporting Gelman in applying for a permit to discharge water into Sister Lake, the treated water into Sister Lake. Again, I'm unsure of the impact of that amount of water. I think that the impartial experts would indeed be eagle and allow their experts to determine whether there'd be any negative impact on the wetlands, on the flow of water, eventually into the creek and then into the river. So if we take this paragraph out, then the settlement document cannot be used by Gelman to say that Scio supports the discharge. Hopefully there'll be further negotiation and Eagle will make a recommendation. Now, it should also be noted that that permitting process is also public. So the public as well as the township will have the ability to comment on that permitting. This way, if we take this out, Gelman simply can't tell the state that, Scio supports this particular approach. Let me also add that it is frustrating to all of us, and I think I can say all of us, and if somebody on the board disagrees, that we can't provide information, all the information that was provided to us because of the confidential nature of the contract negotiations. But I can say that based on the comments we heard, this was personally my biggest concern. And so I would like to move the amendment to the settlement document to remove paragraph 5.c. That's the motion.
Okay. Okay. There's support for motion by Martin, support by Green for that. is there any further discussion on that?
Go ahead, Kathy.
Go ahead, Kathy.
Okay, a couple comments. Are you saying, Erwin, that you would be wanting us to ask Eagle for a preliminary determination on the NPDES permit?
Preliminary to what?
Prior to approval of the settlement documents, meaning that it would be kind of a conditional sort of approval.
I'll defer to.
I'm just asking.
I'll defer to Mr. Stapleton to the process on this, but I would believe, and Bill, you can correct me, that we can approve the settlement document and the attached CJ without making a statement about whether we support the permitting. That could happen separately. Bill, is that correct?
Yes, that's correct. I mean, essentially removing that provision would allow the township to fully participate in the permitting process and in the public comment and right to provide input when Eagle's considering all of the issues involved when deciding whether to issue that NPDES permit.
Okay.
Which is a right that we have right now.
Sure.
Correct.
I thought the talk that you had mentioned before had to do with getting a preliminary determination on the NPDES permit as a condition to approving the CJ.
Are you addressing that to me? No.
I am.
I would say prior to implementing rather than approving.
Okay. Well, everyone knows this. I'll just make a statement. I have a problem with this for many reasons, and I'll leave it at that and make more of a statement later. But I think that there's more wrong with the total CJ than just this portion of the settlement agreement. So by agreeing to just what you're proposing, we're saying that everything else is okay, and everything else is not okay here. It's not acceptable.
I'd just like to add one thing, which is the public also has a right to be heard in the NPDES permitting process, as I understand it. There will be robust public comment, and the public will be able to participate at least in that process, as will we.
The public process is going on right now, the public comment process.
Any more comments, discussion on the amendment? We're looking at the amendment right now.
So just clarification for anybody who doesn't have it in front of them. Bill, to clarify, we would not, if we were to amend the resolution to approve the settlement documents, our approval of the settlement documents would be entirely conditioned on the removal of section 5C in its entirety, correct?
That is correct.
Okay, thanks.
Any more discussion? Donna, you are muted.
If we approve this motion, are we approving the settlement agreement, the CJ?
No.
De facto.
No, we are just, right now, we are dealing with the proposed amendment, the amendment to the settlement docs. And that's, I don't have that section in front of me.
Just this.
Sorry.
Just
yes.
that, okay.
just the amendment, not the
not the resolution that.
Not the resolution that was motioned and seconded earlier.
So we're
Can it be said, though, that we're going to be affecting the consent judgment in approving or disapproving? I don't want to get into something that the water is all muddy and someone says, well, you did this, that means you did that.
This is simply an amendment to the settlement document. We're not approving or disapproving of anything else.
Right.
So we'll vote on the consent judgment as a separate item.
Correct.
We'll vote on that resolution that Jack read separately.
Right. So the proposed resolution, which I read, was moved and supported. Then Erwin introduced an amendment to the settlement documents, which was supported. We're in discussion on the amendment, and then we will vote on the amendment. Then we will go back to the resolution. We'll have discussion on the resolution before we vote on the resolution. So, yes, David.
I too share Kathy's concern about the optics of us taking this paragraph out. It kind of implies that we're okay with the discharge of the purge water into First Sister Lake, but which I'm opposed to. I don't think that should happen. But I'm also concerned that if we do this amendment, if we add this amendment to the paperwork, will Gelman accept it, or will they say, "I'm sorry, this is no good. We don't accept this change"? And then if they say that, where are we? Do we start all over again? Do we have to come back and vote on the resolution with VC back in or 5C back in?
If the amendment fails, we're back to the original documents,
which would have this clause in it where we support them going to the NPDES. Okay.
Right.
All right. So,
any other thoughts on their discussion on the amendment?
I want to ask one more clarification question. So we're talking in general any NPDES permit, not specifically a permit to discharge into First Sister Lake, and not specifically a permit to discharge into Honey Creek.
Yeah, it says
any.
It says plural. It's permits plural. Well, that would be my read on it, Kathy. Bill, would you like to enter?
Yeah, that is correct. It is not limited to the First Sister Discharge Lake NPDES permit.
Any other comments, discussion before we call the roll?
If I could, Jack?
Yes, Jess.
Thanks. One significant part of section 5C is that it is so broad, which I think is important and powerful to have the amendment to take it out. I'm sure you've all read this for the record, or people have it in front of us, but it's the township's entry into the settlement agreement shall constitute evidence of its approval and support for Eagle's issuance of wetlands permits and PDES permits and the renewal of the 2014 permits as reasonably necessary to implement the remediation. And why I'm supportive of deleting section 5C is because I'm very concerned that the implementation of the Gelman remediation could be done through means that might further hurt our ecosystem, including some of the concerns for the Park Lake well and others. And so I think by eliminating section 5C, it's really important. It's not just about the First Sister Lake. It's not just about if Scio, it's not just about, taking away our responsibility. I think it actually provides us with the chance to be a responsible participant in each of those decisions as they go forth. With that settlement agreement language as is, it takes us out of it and basically says, you know, to Gelman, you know, they could hold up the settlement and say, looky here, you know, you said we could do, you were supportive of whatever permits we needed to get in order to do the remediation. So I think it's important, and I think it gives us more power by eliminating 5C in its entirety. So I'm supportive of that.
I agree with Jess, and I would like to take the opportunity now to talk about the EPA. This is as good a time as any, I think. But
Chris,
there's been a lot.
Shouldn't we deal with this motion and then have a general discussion after the amendment?
Jack, you're leading the meeting.
The order of events is we will vote on the amendment. We're voting on the amendment only. Then we will come back to the primary motion, which was the resolution. We'll have discussion on the resolution, and then we'll take a vote on the resolution.
How about further discussion? When do you want to do that? Further discussion about the entire thing?
After we vote on the amendment.
Right.
Okay, good.
Yep. So we're in discussion on the amendment only. We will, when discussion ends, we will vote on the amendment. Then we will go back to the original resolution for discussion on it, and then ultimately take a vote on the resolution. So any further discussion on the amendment?
I want to make one more comment. I'm concerned, as David said, and I said previously, about the optics of it. And if you look at other paragraphs in just the settlement agreement, for example, paragraph D talks about us not requiring wetlands mitigation.
Mm-hmm.
Well, we're leaving that in. I mean, so there are many other paragraphs here that are unacceptable that we're leaving in. So that's okay. I mean, I understand the reason for your motion, Erwin, but I'm just pointing out it's got some problems too.
The idea was that I agree with that, but the idea was that the wetland mitigation would be part of that permitting process.
Well, read paragraph D.
Yeah, I saw that, but I think this would supersede the Eagle's activities would supersede that.
Not necessarily. Paragraph D would remain.
Paragraph D, just as a clarification, deals only with the township ordinance regarding wetlands.
Mitigation.
Right, but yeah, Eagle also has requirements. Anything else, Kathy, on this? Okay.
Nope.
Anyone else have anything relative, any discussion on the amendment?
I just don't want to get caught on supporting an amendment, and then ultimately it's going to end up supporting the entire document. I don't want to get in that position.
Yep.
Could I just say something to that?
Yes.
Yeah. Okay, thanks. So Donna, just to be clear, it's the motion is to amend the resolution. So it is just a motion to amend the resolution. The resolution itself has not yet been acted on.
Right.
So just trying to say it 3 different ways so that we're all clear for the record.
You can split your ballot on this, Donna.
Yeah, we won't hold you to it.
Not a straight ticket. Okay. Any other comments, discussion on the amendment? Hearing none, seeing none, please call the roll. So a yes vote is in support of the amendment. A no vote is against the amendment.
Okay. Knowles?
Yes.
Flintoff?
Yes.
Palmer?
Yes.
Green?
Yes.
Knoll?
No.
Martin?
Yes.
Reed? Yes. Passes 6-1.
Okay, so the amendment passes. We now go to discussion on the main resolution. Anyone like to kick off this discussion?
Sure. Go ahead.
Well, my only comment was, can Bill address, there were a number of legal related issues that came up in the public session. Bill, I'm hoping you were making notes on that. If you could address what rights we're giving up, what rights we maintain, just to clarify that for all of us as well as
So I think maybe the most important part of this is if the township were to approve the settlement, it would maintain continuing rights under the order, and that would be the right to stay involved essentially in regard to enforcement of the consent judgment, and that would relate to issues such as termination of an extraction well, modifying the prohibition zone, any modification of the consent judgment. The interveners and Scio Township would have the right to dispute resolution on those issues if the township were to disagree with Eagle or Gelman, and also if it could not be resolved in dispute resolution, then it would be the matter would go to the court for decision. So that's a very important continuing right that the interveners would have. I heard a number of comments that suggested that Scio would be giving up all future rights related to the consent judgment. And that's not accurate to the extent that the township maintains continuing rights under the proposed order.
And the issue about the EPA and future ability to go to the EPA?
Yeah, there is a prohibition against soliciting the EPA in the order, and if Scio were to do that, there's essentially a penalty attached to the language in the order, which provides that the township would lose its continuing rights under the order if it were to petition the EPA.
Bill, so when we lose those rights, that's just losing. You're going to call it our seat at the table, correct?
That would be losing your seat at the table with respect to future enforcement of the consent judgment. If the county and or the city of Ann Arbor is part of the consent judgment and they don't choose to go to EPA and stay in the consent judgment, then those interveners would still have the ability to dispute resolution and to petition the court, even though Scio would not. There would be at least an intervener remaining that would be able to enforce rights under the consent judgment.
But the other items in the settlement documents, like water supply for other wells that may be affected, that would remain. Those would remain. We're not losing those rights.
Correct. The CJ requires Gelman to provide and pay for alternative water supplies to any residential wells that become contaminated.
And Bill,
okay, thank you.
And Bill, if we sign the agreement and then at a later point petition the EPA, the remediation that Gelman would have agreed to under the consent judgment would continue. Is that right?
Yes. I mean, there's no reason why it wouldn't continue I suppose Gelman could, if Gelman has installed the extraction wells and the remediation is ongoing, there's certainly no reason why it wouldn't continue, even if there is a pending petition to EPA.
Thank you.
One follow-up question, Bill. Settlement agreement, release of claims, the forever waive, relinquish, release everybody and their grandma forever in the past and the future.
Right.
When would that, what is a scenario when we wouldn't have to release them from that?
Well, I guess the first one is if there were PFAS related issues, that is not released. The other situation would be, any future releases from the site that aren't associated with an MPDS discharge permit would also not be part of the release. What it releases is all hazardous substances, obviously including 1,4-dioxane, that have been released at the site. That's what the release covers, and excluding any PFAS chemicals.
And a follow-up. So what if we find, what if, say, Gelman does not do the remediation as ordered to do through the fourth consent judgment? Then what happens to our claims?
Then that's when we would exercise our rights under the order, our continuing rights. If they're not abiding by the terms of the consent judgment, that's when we go back to the court and we would bring a motion asking the judge to enter an order of compliance with the consent judgment. So that's an example of a situation where we would be allowed to go back to the court and enforce the terms of the consent judgment.
Thank you.
Bill, could you explain if we turn this down and what are the next steps? What's sort of the next process?
Yeah, it will likely, if we turned it down and the city turned it down, I think that we would have a status conference with the judge, and it would be up to the judge to really decide next steps. The judge could say, we need to just keep litigating, or at least start litigation, because we haven't really started litigation. The interveners would file our complaints, and we'd be in court in discovery and motion practice. The judge could, if the judge thinks that that there are a limited number of issues remaining to be resolved, the judge could maybe hold an evidentiary hearing on those particular issues and hear evidence. The judge could also order the parties back to mediation. The judge could appoint a mediator or an arbitrator to assist the parties in trying to resolve the remaining issues. So there's a number of different scenarios there, and it will likely depend on how close the judge thinks we are to getting the issues resolved.
Thank you. I've sort of been all over the board on this, as some of you know. Sort of both sides, yes and no. This is an incredibly difficult decision. We get, I understand there's strong public sentiment from those that we've heard of to reject this, CJ. And I listened to that. And I also heard Jean Tanaka at the meeting in January. She was from the EPA, who stated that if the EPA took this as a Superfund site, and there is some question of that, whether they would or not, that it could easily be 8 to 10 years before anything happens, before there's any kind of cleanup action. So, you know, we're looking, if somebody said earlier, if this was in my backyard, what would I want? You know, if it's in my backyard, I want action as soon as it can happen. And in 8 or 10 years, you know, 2030 or 2029, the plume continues to spread between now and then. The CJ isn't perfect. It is far from perfect. A lot of time, money, and effort has gone into getting this to where it is. And if we turn it down, and if it goes to litigation, then open up the pocketbook, because the $300,000 we've spent will probably be a drop in the bucket by the time we are in the middle of that. Doesn't mean it's not worth it. If the results are what, you know, turn out to be what we want them to be. I am not pleased with the potential discharge into the First Sister Lake. I'm not an expert on those kinds of matters. A few people are. So, you know, warranted or not, at some point you have to put your faith in the people that are supposed to know what they're doing, the people that have been entrusted at the state and federal level to review those permits and to determine you know, what is and what isn't acceptable based on the data that they asked for and the results that they get. I couldn't begin to understand everything they have to go through to evaluate that stuff. But at some point, bad history or not, you know, things change. Things change in Lansing. Things change at the federal level. It hasn't been historically. We've lost out almost at every turn. The state hasn't acted, I think, in ways that are in a manner that we've been happy with. But we do have new voices in Lansing. We have new people in positions of power. And one has to hope that will result in more favorable outcomes. You know, a couple of the things that I do like about the CJ, because it isn't all bad, is mass removal at the site. You know, we haven't had that. That's where it's really bad, and you know, there's some a fair amount of different types of mass removal that would occur at the host site, and I think that's a really good thing, because that's where it's the hottest and that's where it's the worst, and that's in Scio Township. So that is a good thing. You know, 14 new monitoring wells are a good thing. Is it enough? Probably not. It's 14 more than we have, and it's probably 14 more if we were to turn this down. It's probably 14 more than we're going to have in the next 8 or 10 years. Same thing with the purge wells. You know, this is not a perfect, I don't want to get the impression I think this is perfect. It isn't. It's far from perfect. Our council has done a great job. They've done as best they can. They fought hard. And this is, you know, they've got us to where we are, and this is, you know, the decision we've got to make. I'll turn it over to somebody else.
Jack, I just wanted to spring off a couple of things that you said and bring a little bit of a little practical point. And the practical point is we're not done. If we reject this, we are not by any means done spending money. It is going to be, I won't put Bill on the spot here, but I'm sure it's going to cost a penny or two or a dime or two to get this thing through trial. I am confident that we will have a very fair hearing from Judge Connors. And I think that it will be a very fair hearing for Gelman as well. If we prevail, I don't know how much more we would get than what we're already getting. And therefore, we have to look at the potential benefit from this really enormous contribution from our general fund here in Scio Township. And while I am confident in the trial judge's ability to give us a fair hearing, I am less confident of what will happen on appeal. And if we prevail, they will appeal. Gelman will appeal, no question about it. Okay, you're talking years and years to go through the appellate process, at least a couple of years to go through the first layer, the Court of Appeals, and then if it goes to the Supreme Court, at least another 2 or 3 years to get through that process. In the meantime, work will still be done under the third amended consent judgment, which none of us are satisfied with. So I think that, you know, we really need to weigh the relative risks and the benefit, the cost, and the potential benefit of continuing on in the trial court. And we can't just say, well, gee, this, you know, the settlement didn't work out. We want to get out of the suit. That's not that easy to do once we invoke the jurisdiction of the court. So maybe we could get out of it. I don't know. Our attorney would try very aggressively to get us out of it if we wanted to just take our cards and go, but that may not happen. And even if it did, Gelman could ask us for attorney's fees, and that could be a substantial cost. So I hate to bring up the mundane. There's a lot more at stake in this situation than money, as we all know. It's our safety and health. But we do have to try to weigh how much more could we benefit from spending a whole lot of money in addition to what we have already spent. So, and I think that, we do have the option of going to the EPA. Yes, we give up something, but we don't give up any money. I think Ann Arbor, as we saw from the presentation by Ann Arbor's attorney, I think they would maybe have to pay a penalty based on previous litigation that they were in with Gelman. We don't. We would give up our rights to enforce under the order of dismissal and the settlement agreement. That's what we would give up. And that would be big, but if if we think that the consent judgment is no longer working for us, then we could move on. So, and go to the EPA. I want to say one more thing about the agreement. We went into this thing telling our attorneys, I'm sure this is true for all the other interveners, but it was true for us. We don't trust Gelman and don't trust the DEQ then, or EGLE now. And based upon that, the attorneys have negotiated a mechanism for us to stay involved and have a voice at critical junctures. If Gelman wants to reduce or terminate their remediation, we have an opportunity to come in. So when things happen that are very critical during the course of the remediation, they have negotiated a way for us to stay involved in that process. And I think that was important for anybody who thinks that we are protecting Gelman or that we trust Gelman. Believe me, we are not. We went into this with that being one of our main problems, and we still feel the same today. And the, you know, the Bill just talked about what's in the settlement agreement and the CJ if they do not fulfill their side of the bargain. And there are many enforcement mechanisms, you know, I'm sure for Eagle, but for us as well as interveners.
Kathy.
Okay. I do not support the CJ, and I will be voting no. I want to respond to a couple comments that were just made. Jack, you commented that it might be 8 to 10 years before the EPA could effectively begin working. We don't know that because this site has been extensively studied and some of the work is done now. So the time period could be significantly shorter. We don't know that, and they didn't know that. Yes, we have spent a lot of money. We have spent close to $500,000, actually. I just got the report from Rebecca at the township. So if we enter into this CJ, if we agree to it, it will require constant oversight by the township for years down the road. And potentially, we will continue to spend a lot of money that way because we'll be doing it. If the EPA is involved, they have expertise in dealing with chemical contamination issues. They have the legal manpower. We won't be paying for it if they are involved. I also wanted to comment on something that you said, Chris, regarding the financial costs. If indeed this goes unchecked, if the pollution continues to spread and it eventually gets to Barton Pond, the litigation costs that we might have had are going to be dwarfed by the costs that we will incur if there is dioxane contamination in Barton Pond and the drinking water supply for Ann Arbor and a significant part of Scio Township. So there are costs, potential costs on both sides. I think this is a flawed agreement. This CJ allows Gelman to avoid an effective, protective, comprehensive cleanup. There is zero support in the community to the CJ. I am concerned about several aspects in it. I'm just going to touch on a few right now and then give other people a chance to speak. But the 500 parts per billion limit, once the levels go down to 500 parts per billion, Gelman can cycle and then petition to terminate their activities. This gives Gelman an exit strategy. It's a very easy exit strategy. And what happens down the road if they have met all the criteria that are outlined in CJ number 4 and they've exited and the plume continues to spread to the Huron River? Then what? I think that there are many potential problems with accepting the CJ. We've already talked about the Park Lake well discharge issue. There had been no study, no data used to look at the environmental impacts of the discharge. We've discussed that previously. But I also want to point out there was a memo submitted to all the interveners prepared by Matt Nod, previously worked with the city of Ann Arbor for over 17 years on the Gelman issue. And he raised concerns about this proposed discharge of contaminated water with dioxane and the known carcinogen bromate, which would go into the Honey Creek system that discharges upstream of the City of Ann Arbor water intake in the Huron River. So if indeed this material is extracted and then the contaminated water discharged into Honey Creek, it eventually is discharged into the Huron River. I also have a concern that this CJ does not require delineation of the plume. So we've heard comments from people, well, they're sort of close to the plume, they're not sure, but a lot of us aren't sure. And there's no required delineation of the plume. I'm also concerned about the expansion of the prohibition zone. That's potentially more of an Ann Arbor issue than a Scio issue, but it should still concern all of us. I'm going to stop at that, let other people speak, and I'll pick up on a few other points later. Thank you.
Anyone else? David?
Oh, you're mute. There you go.
I too, I think I echo a lot of Kathy's concerns. I especially am concerned about the discharge of the water into First Sister Lake. And I know that they have to go through, Gelman would have to go through the permitting process. And in my thinking, there are at least 3 different levels of input for the permitting process. One is, of course, the public input, which a lot of which we've heard tonight, or this afternoon, sorry, soon to be tonight. The second would be the expert opinion, and we've seen at least one of those, and that would be Dr. Lemke had a nice presentation regarding the effect, the assumed effect on the lake. And then the third, of course, would be the state standards. And it's my understanding that the numbers that the Gelman is proposing are the state standards for dioxane and bromate. And you know, every time I'm assured that the water, the 7.2 is drinking water standard, I say to myself, is that person in the back of their mind saying, but I wouldn't drink it? And so you got to think, you know, would you have your 2-year-old child drink water with 7% or 7.0 parts per billion of bromate or dioxane, or 10 points for bromate? I wouldn't. Would you want your pregnant wife to drink that, 3-month pregnant wife to drink that water? I don't think that's a good idea. And I don't think it's a good idea to swim in it either. And if it goes into First Sister Lake, it's going to then migrate to Second Sister Lake. Second Sister Lake has residences fairly close to the lake that have fairly shallow wells. And I'm not a hydrologist, I'm not a geologist, but water moves, and I can see how the water might contaminate 1 or 2 or more of those wells. What we're doing here is we're moving the pollution from underground to above ground. It might be less, but it's still, we're moving it up, and I think that is I think that's a bad idea, and I'm concerned that they're not using their own technology, which is better than the technology they're using currently. And I just think, you know, Kathy's a lot more educated on this than I, and she went through a list of, the other day, she just rattled off 10 items off the top of her head that were, gave her serious concern about this CJ. And I can't really comment on any of them because, like I said, she's much more educated than I, but I'm very uncomfortable with this current CJ. And that's all I have.
Yeah. Any other?
We do have, oh, yeah, I just wanted to say, you know, our experts have talked about that, David, about that, the 2 methods, the UV, you know, the 2 methods of treatment, and the ozone and the UV. And I think our experts were, you know, were not convinced. Our experts thought that the method that they are using, or that they're going to use in some of the, you know, pump and treat wells, is not necessarily an inferior method at all. and that the other method, which I know some people are saying is truly the best, requires a lot of additional chemicals to be put in that may cause problems down the road or perhaps even more immediately. But I did also want to say that one of the very strong points in my mind about this CJ is the source area cleanup. It's significantly more cleanup than has ever been done before. We have some different methods. We certainly have pump and treat in that area. We have some different methods that are being used, but our experts tell us that these measures, as well as the sentinel and monitoring wells, will help at least protect our residential wells, as well as prevent migration into the eastern area and further into the western area. But the source area is important not just for Scio Township and its residential well users. It's also important for the city of Ann Arbor and all its citizens, because if you reduce from the source area, hopefully it will reduce migration. Hopefully it'll never make it to the river and Ann Arbor and part of our township's water supply. So it's a very important area, and it's good. It's, the provisions are good. And I think Dan Bicknell said, and recall him remarking in one of the sessions where he had a fairly lengthy presentation, that the source area provisions were good. So I just wanted to put that on the record. I think that, the additional wells in the western area, as I say, our experts are telling us that they're satisfied with the network of monitoring and sentinel wells, and there's a sufficient network to detect any northern migration. There is delineation, I believe, but it's not as much as we wanted. It's my understanding that we do have some delineation. It's not that there isn't any, Kathy. There is some, but it was never as much. It's never been as much as we really wanted. And about the prohibition zone, yes, there is a provision in the CJ where they can expand the prohibition zone, but to do so, Gelman has to show clear and convincing evidence that it is necessary. And that's a very high standard. So it's not as if all they can do, they can't just get out of their obligations by expanding the prohibition zone or institutional controls, as we sometimes call it. So that's all I have to say right now.
Let me just make a few comments to that. In terms of what you said about the source area, several people have brought up the lack of performance standards in terms of the phytoremediation and the heat extraction method. I think that is a concern because we don't really know how much is going to be removed, and they're not going to measure it in any way. In terms of the actual extraction, the Park Lake well, we don't even know if they're going to get the approval for that. They may not, because they may not get the discharge permit. I don't know. But the Park Lake well would only be temporary, and the extraction would only go on for 2 years, potentially. So the amount of work that Gelman is proposing doing at the source area may not be as significant as you think. It could end up being much less than what I think you're talking about right now. Let me say one more thing about the treatment methods. So David mentioned that one of his concerns was Gelman is not using the state-of-the-art method that can treat down to non-detect. As all of you know, they used to use this method up until 2004, and then they quit using it. And Matt Naud talks about that in his memo too. He talks about how it is a more expensive method, and Gelman preferred potentially to go to the method that they are using now, the ozone method, which cannot treat down to non-detect. The ozone method has a problem because it releases bromate in the treatment process. And bromate is a known carcinogen. It's not a suspected carcinogen like dioxane. It is a known carcinogen. And I find that very significant if increased amounts of bromate are going to be released into the Huron River, if indeed that they get the NPDES permit to do this. I'll stop there for now.
Just one quick comment, and we're talking about releases below drinking water standards, and if we have any faith whatsoever in our state officials, which of course some people could doubt, but there is a standard, and if it is below that standard, it is indeed safe to drink. And to answer David's question, yes, I would drink it if it's below the drinking water standard. And as that water moves, into the creek, into the river, it's getting more and more diluted. So by the time it's in, hopefully it will never get to Huron River, but if by the time it gets to the river, either through the aquifer or through the discharge, it'll be negligible. It'll be well below a drinking water standard. And that's the worst case. So we're talking really insignificant levels here. And if I were living next door, would I feel any differently? No. I mean, if you believe in science, which we should probably do, it is a safe level. That's all I'm going to say about that.
Okay, well, Erwin, just be clear, different states have different levels. So Michigan's level for dioxane is 7.2 for the drinking water standard. Many states have a level of 1. So just because we're here in Michigan and we can say, oh, this meets our drinking water standard, it's safe, that is not necessarily true.
But if it's 7 when it's going into the lake.
I'm talking about, okay, I'm going back to general standards.
Yeah,
I'm not talking just about discharge here into Honey Creek.
Right.
Or the First Sister Lake, but I'm
well
talking
below
in
1
general.
by the time it gets into the creek. If it's 7.
It will be diluted. It will be.
Yeah.
But remember, dioxane has been detected in the Ann Arbor water supply, right? Because they use a very sensitive method for detection, the 522 method, that Eagle doesn't use. So it's already happened, and it's likely going to happen again. Excuse my dog here. There's a squirrel. Hey.
Jessica.
Yes.
I got him.
You're muted.
Thank you. A question related to bromate, Bill. In a scenario where they're discharging bromate, and even if it's permitted, and we find that it creates harm, what is the effect of the release section in our settlement agreement?
Bill, you're muted.
And Bill, you're muted.
Sorry about that. If the bromate is discharged in accordance with the NPDES permit, I mean, that would be a covered matter under the settlement agreement.
Okay. Thank
What do you mean by a covered matter?
I mean, it would be a matter that is released as part of the settlement agreement.
Okay.
That would be considered a future release in accordance with an NPDES permit.
Okay. Not okay, but I understand.
Other comments?
So to follow up on that, generally, and I know you can't speak super generally, Bill, but if their cleanup activities are in accordance with the law and properly permitted, and those cleanup activities then result in additional pollution, those would be covered matters.
Correct.
Okay, thank you.
I was just going to point out that we can't really change change the 7.2 standard as a part of our consent judgment, as a part of this litigation. That has to be done through a regulatory process or maybe even a statutory process. That will not be done through this litigation. We just can't do it. And the EPA indicated when we were here on January 16th that they would use Michigan standard. They would not impose a lower standard for safe drinking water. It would be the 7.2 standard.
Comment? Any other comments? Donna, do you have anything?
You know, I just can't see doing something halfway. Why don't we go for the gold and go for the federal EPA cleanup? We're just pushing the ball down the road. Lived it for 35 years, and I don't think it's going to change, guys.
Just quickly, even if the EPA were involved, we're never getting to zero. There will always be contamination there. I mean, it's unrealistic that we're going to dig everything up and remove, every bit of dioxin. It just is not scientifically possible. So there's no gold to go for. It's, you take the best of bad scenarios.
Erwin, I think people accept we're not going to get down to a pristine aquifer if the EPA gets involved, but I think people want a better cleanup than what we have right now, or what is being proposed in this fourth amended CJ. I think that this whole dilution strategy that Eagle and Gelman have embraced over the years is not what people want. I mean, we've heard from residents, they want a better cleanup. They pointed that out clearly.
I mean, there's a lot of things we want, but it's not really feasible in a reasonable amount of time.
With the EPA, it could be feasible.
It doesn't. I politely disagree.
I do also.
Okay.
Other comments?
Well, let me just raise a few more issues if we're near the end here. With this proposed CJ, it has eliminated the Maple Road containment objective and moved the compliance point to the Huron River. So that changes some things in terms of what Gelman can do. I agree there aren't enough sentinel wells, and we essentially heard this from Larry Lemke. He acknowledged that indeed the well placement isn't going to let us know if fingers of the plume are getting close to residential wells that are used for drinking water. Roger Rayle has raised the issue that the hotspots at the core are not being dealt with sufficiently with what the Gelman is proposing doing on their site. Scio Township residents that are who are on the fringe of the plume, and I would assume Ann Arbor Township residents also, don't have a plan. I mean, we do not have a plan for residents who are close to the plume and dependent on their wells for drinking water. Yes, Gelman will pay for water when the drinking water in their wells hits 7.2, but most families aren't going to want to continue drinking the water once they know of dioxin contamination in their wells. So, and I am concerned that Gelman has sufficiently identified their exit strategies here in multiple areas that if they meet certain criteria, they can get out. And I think we should all be concerned about that. I don't like the fact that we would be dismissed as interveners. I think we should stay in, basically. We had the Court of Appeals and the state Supreme Court say we could remain as interveners. Why are we giving it up now? I would like to remain with all the privileges that an intervener has. And I also, we haven't talked much about this, but there's uncertainty about how much cleanup would actually occur in the Western area. We don't know for sure how much would happen. So I see many, many concerns with this CJ. I think that Gelman is getting more than we are getting. And for that reason, I cannot support it.
Okay.
You have your hand up? Chris, you have your hand up?
Oh, Jess does.
Oh, Jess,
Chris,
I'm sorry. Go ahead, Jess.
Chris, you are muted. Chris, you're muted.
Okay, it's okay. I'm done.
Okay.
I forgot to take my hand down.
Yes.
Thank you. Thanks. So Bill, in a scenario where this Scio Township, well, we don't know what's going to happen. We know what Ann Arbor has decided. We're deliberating now. The county needs to deliberate. But in a scenario where this fourth amended consent judgment is entered and Scio Township settles, agrees to the terms as proposed amended here today, what scenario would Scio Township then go to the EPA?
I mean, I'll just say this: there's a cooperation clause in the settlement agreement that that states that Scio won't petition the EPA, but there isn't. I mean, there's nothing preventing Scio Township after approving the consent judgment to petition the EPA at some point in the future. The order very specifically describes essentially a penalty for an intervener who does that, and the penalty is you basically lose your seat at the table. So, Gelman can't forever prevent any intervener from filing an EPA petition. I mean, that's obviously just not something they can do. But the settlement documents basically have a provision that is a penalty if that occurs. And that's, I think, probably the best way to put it.
Okay. And a penalty to those who are interveners.
Correct. The penalty would only apply to those interveners which choose to petition the EPA or do not oppose another governmental entity's petition to the EPA.
Great. And for the record, Scio Township is not an intervener under this proposal. Under the proposed, we would lose our intervener rights under this, but would retain certain continuing rights. But we would lose. We would no longer be an intervener. Is that correct?
We would not be identified as an intervener or be a party to the consent judgment.
Thank you.
But what the order was designed to do was to preserve continuing rights such that we would maintain an intervener status, if you will, without being officially identified as a party to the litigation.
Great, thank you.
And just to clarify, Bill, you're talking about a penalty, but it's not a financial penalty, correct?
It's not a financial penalty.
Right.
As described in the order.
Right. We would the remediation would still go on. We wouldn't pay any money. We just wouldn't be able to exercise the enforcement rights that were created in the order of dismissal and the settlement agreement.
Correct.
You're muted.
Sorry. Any further comments on this? None?
Can I make a comment?
Sure.
Yeah, thank you. You know, I'm gonna vote today to approve the settlement documents with the amendment to delete section 5C. And I just want to share a little bit about why. As the township is home to this terrible environmental injustice, and we bear responsibility to not just continuing to fight Gelman, but also to build up our political and technical capacity in partnership with our community and surrounding jurisdictions to eventually get as full of a cleanup as is possible of this ongoing disaster. Approving this settlement with the amendment is just a very small step. It's very incremental. It's far from what we need, it's far from what we deserve, and I think it's far from what we can achieve. I joined in June 2019. The negotiations on the fourth amended CJ were underway. The strategy has gone on for a while, and through this process, I've come to conclude that you know, we've hit our limits. I think we have hit the limits of what we have been able to achieve. I want to thank Bill and all the attorneys for doing their very, very best. And while I agree, what is proposed is not good enough. It's not what I want. It's not what we ultimately need. And it is true. This is, I believe, as good as we are going to get through this negotiation. Now, I can't see the future. I don't know what the judge will determine, but I do think this is about as good as we are going to get through this process. So it's as good of a deal as a little township could get in a complex case with a giant corporate polluter. I think it's just the reality of the vast power differential between them and us. And it's a very, very small step forward. I think that, you know, the reality is that we're stuck with Eagle. We're stuck with the inadequate laws we have at the state level that don't adequately protect us. And I would rather spend some time and energy focusing on some regulatory and legal reform at the state level. Because even under a scenario where the EPA would designate this and act on this as a Superfund site with an administrative order, they would likely defer to Eagle. And that is the problem. No matter how we, you know, rearrange the players in this scenario, we're still stuck with some players who are not doing their job. I like that this agreement would maintain some continuing rights to stay involved. And I would like our little township's involvement to be as powerful and sophisticated as possible, to strengthen our political organizing and technical capacity, to make sure that we compel Gelman and Eagle to enforce all of this, and additionally take other steps to improve our state laws and regulations. I would also like to be near the end of our negotiations soon. I don't know what will happen, but we have spent $500,000. It has been under a court confidentiality order, and there's nothing to like about either of those things. So I would say, you know, I think that if we have fought so hard into getting these continuing rights, then I would support this today, but only with a commitment to make sure that we use those continuing rights. And I think that it would take an investment of township resources in next year's budget into, you know, some political strategy, some technical collaboration. I would like to see if we might formalize our partnership with our surrounding jurisdictions on some of this to move this forward. And if we find over the next year or two that the continuing rights that we have won aren't worth it, if we're just too small to make a difference, if they're not helpful, if we can't figure out how to compel change, then we take a different approach. I don't see the EPA as an option for today. I see the EPA going to the EPA as possibly an option for tomorrow. But right now, I don't think it's an either or. I wish there was so much more we could do to right this wrong. I don't think that there is in this negotiation. And so with that, I just wanted to say that I'll be voting today to approve the resolution as amended.
Thank you, Jess. Anyone else have any comments?
I have a question.
Yes.
It hasn't been brought up. Can the EPA and work with EGLE together? We keep talking about either or. Can they work together on this project?
Bill, correct me if I'm wrong, but my understanding is that EGLE or that EPA, should they get involved, they basically work with EGLE or look to EGLE as the, lack of a better description, the day-to-day enforcement or oversight of the whatever the cleanup operation is.
Yes, Jack, that's correct. They would, I mean, much of what they would do would be deferred, essentially to the EGLE personnel that's responsible for the site. And that's just, that's the way EPA operates. I mean, they work closely with state officials who are involved at any particular site.
But Bill, don't they provide a degree of oversight
Sure.
to EGLE?
Sure. I mean, that's sort of part of their
Yeah.
role.
Yeah.
Absolutely. Yeah.
And I think that we have heard from people that it has been helpful to have some EPA involvement over the last 2 years at least. We had it for a year. In terms of evaluating this site as a potential Superfund site, EGLE was much more responsive to resident concerns when they knew the EPA was looking over their shoulder. And that's my concern. I mean, that's why I think it would be better to petition for EPA now, because it is going to take some time. I don't think it's going to take 8 to 10 years, but I think it's going to take some time. And at this time, we've got some collective momentum going. City of Ann Arbor has rejected the CJ. We don't know what the county is going to do. But right now, we have potentially several or maybe 2 governmental units that might collectively petition the governor to request EPA involvement. That's a different situation than what we might have down the road when maybe Scio gets upset, but Ann Arbor is satisfied or whatever. I don't know that we're going to have the collective will down the road that we might have right now, the momentum. That's my concern.
Comments, questions? Anything? Anyone? Seeing no hands to speak. David, I would ask that you call the roll.
And this is on the resolution, correct?
On the resolution as
amended.
As amended.
Yeah.
Okay. All right. I'm going to go in reverse order this time instead of going the way we normally do. So I'm going to vote first. I'm going to say no. Martin?
Yes.
Noel?
No.
Green?
Yes.
Palmer?
No.
Flintoff?
Yes.
Jack, you're the tiebreaker.
Yes.
Okay, resolution passes 4-3.
Okay, and moving on in the agenda, which I can't find. We have no other business at hand. So the next one would be citizen comment. And David, does anyone have their hand raised?
Well, we just had one. Wait a minute, is it there?
Jillian and Roger.
Okay. All right. Jillian, you have the floor, and then Roger.
Yeah, it helps to unmute. I know we're not supposed to ask questions, but I'm going to anyways. So when this is in the future, and when Gelman gets to their 500 parts per billion, and they meet all their criteria, and they ditch out on us, can we go to the EPA then? Or does that, the EPA won't hold them accountable, or are we stuck with the mess for the rest of the cleanup?
Bill, correct me if I'm wrong, but if they want to cycle or shut down a well, that they have to petition to do that. It's not an automatic.
Correct.
Well, this, excuse me, sorry, but there's criteria in the CJ that states there's an exit for them.
Yeah, they can petition. It's not an automatic.
Correct. And under the terms of the order, the interveners would have the right to participate in any decision to terminate that extraction well.
Thank you.
David, any others?
Yeah, I'm just, I have to tell you, I'm disappointed. Roger, you're next, and then followed by Dan Bicknell.
I'm really disappointed and kind of ashamed. And some of you should be too.
Oh.
Do you know how much 500 parts per billion is? Do you know how many purge wells the company can shut down right now because it's under 500 parts per billion? Bill, tell them how many. You must have that data. How many? How many wells would be shut down right now because you just voted yes on the 500 part per billion?
Well, I mean, the 500 part per billion does not apply to all extraction wells.
Yeah, but they can walk away when it's 500 part per billion. What's to keep them from shutting down
they can't
purge wells right now?
Yeah, and they can't walk away. They would have to petition to get permission from Eagle.
Yeah, and Eagle's going to say, well, Scio Township approved it. It must be okay. I can't believe this.
They would have to petition Eagle to shut down any extraction well, and the interveners have the right to participate in that process.
And how many extraction wells have already been shut down when it's over 500? How many have they shut down already that were over 500? Did you guys discuss that? Did you look at it? Did you look at any of the data? How many?
I mean, I am not personally aware of any.
Of course you're not. And that's the problem. You make these decisions out of view of the public who has actually more information than you guys do. Jesse, you're new to this, but I thought you would be up to speed more quickly. Locking all future township boards into this action is going to destroy part of Scio Township. It might end up even destroying part of Ann Arbor and the university. How can you get out of this now? You can petition the EPA to get involved, because that'll at least give you some leverage during these. The company may not accept your minor adjustment, and if you tonight vote to go to the EPA, that'll send them a message that you mean business, because that can go on in parallel while you're waiting for the judge to act on this. And the fact that you're not sticking with the other governmental units, Gelman's going to seize on that and divide and conquer. So you need to bail yourselves out here as quickly as you can. This is unacceptable. That's all I have to say. Really disappointed.
Okay, thank you, Roger. Dan Bicknell is next, and then Jackie Couteau.
Thank you, David. I just wanted to clarify a couple of points. The major point is that if this does become a US EPA Superfund site, that the lead agency is the United States Environmental Protection Agency. On a day-to-day matter, it's not the state. There are some sites where it's a state lead, but US EPA has said specifically for the Gelman site that it would be a federal lead site. So it's not accurate to say that the day-to-day activities would be deferred to Eagle. That's completely incorrect. They would be led by probably Michael Burkhoff, who you all met, as the remedial project manager. Second point is that it is possible to clean up this site to a level of drinking water quality. And as I provided in the Northrop Bethpage site, it's being done on a site that's 4 times as large as this site and twice as deep. So it's not a technically impracticable solution. It is very practical. Thank you, guys.
Okay. Jackie, you're up next, and followed by Frode.
Obviously, I'm disappointed in this decision, but I do want to say that agreeing to this consent judgment is not the end of this process. We will be looking to the Board of Trustees for strong guidance for keeping Gelman accountable to these terms, for exploring the policy options at the state level that Trustee Flintoft has suggested, and for continuing to explore whether and how to get the EPA involved. Thank you.
Thank you, Jackie. And Frode, you're next, followed by Ralph McGee.
Now you can hear me.
Yep.
Okay. I forgot to say on my previous comment that I'm from 5127 Dexter and Arbor Road. But anyway, I'm a little bit perturbed by the fact that this decision was made, and it was a close decision, and I'm amazed that the expertise that was displayed here, expertise in terms of water quality, et cetera, was not particularly listened to. And I wish it had been a different decision. Listen to the expert, listen to the people who have done a lot of the work, and hopefully you're not going to reject that in the future, and you will take that to heart what has been done and what has been done because people are concerned about where they live and what the future is going to hold. So I'm disappointed in your decision, and I urge you to listen more to the people who know what they're talking about in terms of the technical details. Thank you.
Thank you, Frode. Next is Ralph McGee, followed by Carol Furtado. Go ahead.
Hi, this is Ralph McKee. I just wanted to follow up on a question that was asked a few minutes ago, and I'll ask it again, but in maybe a slightly more pointed way. I heard the question about why can't Gelman or Danaher just walk when the wells get down to 500 parts per billion? And the answer, I think I heard, was, well, they have to petition, and the interveners still have rights to contest that. I'd ask this question to Mr. Stapleton. Doesn't the judge just look right back at you and say, you agreed to 500 parts per billion? That's what you agreed to. It's right here in the consent judgments, right here in all your documents. What possible way would you have to contest that when you've agreed to the criteria? Isn't that just a completely illusory petition process at that point? What am I missing?
This isn't, as stated earlier in the meeting, this really isn't intended to be a question and answer. I understand there are a lot of questions out there people may have, but this is not a time when we typically do questions and answers. And I've been asked to not to address any more questions. So.
Okay, but I guess that doesn't make a lot of sense to me. You just provided an answer, and now you won't give the reasons for it. I guess I'll just leave it at that.
Are you done, Ralph?
Yes.
Okay. Thank you. Carol, you're next, followed by Rita Mitchell.
You've been listening to about an hour of public opinion telling you not to approve this, and you went ahead and approved it anyway. You're not listening to the residents of Scio Township. And some of us, if the plume expands, we will have our wells ruined. And in previous times, Gelman took 1 year to get people on municipal water. So is that what you're going to do for us? Who's going to come and live in my house and after this happens to me? I'm just so disappointed. You're not representing your people. It's really disgusting. I think you should be ashamed of yourselves, except for the 3 of you that voted the right way. The rest of you are, I can't believe how awful you are. That's it.
Thank you, Carol. Rita, you're next. And no, I see no other hands.
I join the many people who've just spoken about deep disappointment in the outcome of this vote. And I really feel that what I said earlier about trust is one that's now in question. I'm very sorry for this outcome. And I would suggest that those of you on the prevailing side may have a change of heart, and you may be able to bring this back to the group for a future vote soon and use the science that's available. It's not like you don't have data. Roger Rayle has done his best to track this as a citizen for years. And I'm really surprised that I'm surprised at this outcome. I really thought the township of any group would be sensitive to what's going on within its boundaries. And this is not the outcome I thought you would make. I'm finished. Thank you.
Okay, thank you. Next is Rob Pattinson. Go ahead, Rob. You have the floor. Rob? Rob, we can't hear you. Okay, Rob, I guess we'll move. Yeah.
He's muted.
Yeah.
Unmute him.
I will unmute him. I thought I did. I can unmute him. He's no. There. Rob, you there? Well, I'm sorry, Rob. We can't hear you. And I see that your microphone is active, but we can't hear you. We can't see you. I guess we could suggest, not much of a consolation, but you can certainly respond via email and send us your comments. I'm going to have to move on to Linda Brower. Linda?
Yes, hello, thank you. I also am very, very disappointed, especially since I know Ann Arbor Township is not an officially intervening party, but I was hoping to go along with their position as well as the Ann Arbor City Council position. As you know, we are stronger together, and Gelman is apparently successful in dividing and conquering. I think, though, that you still have a couple of options. I don't know what the township rules of order are in terms of bringing back a resolution that's passed, but perhaps you have something similar to what Ann Arbor does, that a party or a supervisor who voted in favor has the option of bringing it back for reconsideration at the next meeting. And I hope that one of the four people who are still seated at the next meeting and who voted to accept this will bring it back at the next meeting for reconsideration. And I hope that you turn it down then. Failing that, or in addition to that, I urge you to do what I think it was Roger Rayle just suggested. This is something that Ann Arbor City Council did after they voted to reject the CJ, but at the same meeting, a council member brought forward a resolution to request Governor Whitmer to support the petition to the EPA for Superfund status. That was postponed till the meeting next week. I think that will pass, although the mayor might veto it. But the important point is that they're going to try to do it, and that's very important on the record. And it's good ammunition to take to further negotiations with Gelman when they see that it did pass an EPA a resolution to go to the EPA passed at Ann Arbor City Council. It would provide further ammunition in negotiations if you did the same thing tonight, which you can do. Please, one of you propose a resolution to ask Governor Whitmer to support the petition to the EPA Superfund status. That won't undo anything you've already done. It just will add to it, and it will add to it in a very positive way. Please consider doing that right now. Thank you.
Thank you. We have a guest. I just have the phone number. Starts with area code 734, and the last three digits are 534. You have the floor. And of course, you have to identify yourself. But I think did you leave and come back? Because I thought.
Hello.
Go ahead.
Good evening. This is Tom Stolberg. I'm a resident of Ann Arbor, and I would just like to express a very heartfelt thank you to the citizens who've worked for years and years on this, and they've expressed themselves so well. They've done the homework, they've done the research, they are experts in this area. You've heard so many voices and the people in CARD and other individuals who have just put years of effort into this. You know, I know you all feel that you're doing what you need to do and making the best decisions you can with the information provided. The overwhelming number of citizens that are opposed to this consent judgment, and we're talking very informed, very active, very engaged for years, these citizens, their input is invaluable, and I really want to thank them, even though the vote does not reflect the expertise, the effort that they've put into this. I wish that you would have listened to them more, but I really want to give them just an immense thank you for all the rest of us, the hard work that they've put in. Thank you all. Good night.
Okay. The only hand left is Rob Patterson, who we tried to get in before. I'm going to try one more time. Rob, can you hear us? Can you talk?
He wrote a chat that said he'll email.
Okay. All right. Well, I think that's it then.
Okay. Is there a motion to adjourn?
I think there's another hand. David Carrie Lepke, do you see that?
Oh, I'm sorry. Okay. Gary, you have the floor.
Can you hear me?
Yes.
Okay, great. Thank you. So this is Carrie Lepke. You all know me from Walnut Ridge, Vice President of the HOA, and I concur with the previous speaker. It's just really, I do want to applaud Roger Rayle and everyone that's been involved in all of this, because it has been their devotion to pay attention to not only the scientific research, but the people around us and everything else. So this is just very disappointing, because I just really feel that where everything was directing, we could achieve better. And to settle for something that is not at least beyond good is disappointing. So I do plan on reaching out to higher government, and I do plan on reaching out to even President Trump about this, because this really is something that is just not to be disregarded, especially with all these people that have been put in 20 years of hard research and work, and the things that I've seen Roger put out today with the PDFs and everything else. This is not something that is just to be reconciled. It's something that we should achieve higher. So I just wanted to say thank you to everyone. I thank you all for your input and your time, because you've had a lot of meetings this week and a lot of things to digest. But I just really expected a different outcome this evening. So again, thank you and good night.
Okay, thank you. I don't see any more hands. Nope.
See no more public comment. Correct, David?
Yep, no more hands.
Is there a motion to adjourn?
No move.
Okay, motion Martin, is there support?
I'll support.
Support Green. Discussion? Hearing none, please call the roll.
Knowles?
Yes.
Flintoff?
Yes.
Palmer?
Yes.
Green?
Yes.
Martin?
Yes.
Kathy?
Yes.
No, sorry, no. Reed, yes. Reed, yes. Passes.
Thank you, everybody.
Thanks, everybody.